Good morning. We are going to continue with the conference, and we have the privilege to have with us Renneboog from Tilburg University, and he's going to answer the question that we all want to hear about, which is who cares about they?
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Let's see whether the presentation can start.
Should be coming up.
Yes. Okay, that's 1, 2. Yeah, so I'm going to talk today about who cares about diversity. I would like to thank the organizers for this flawless organization and for having invited me. Now, you probably think this is going to be a controversial talk. Well, it isn't, because you should not interpret or read the title as who cares about diversity, but you should read it as who cares about diversity. And that makes an essential difference. So I'm going to talk about who, the stakeholders who care about diversity. So it's a very factual paper. I don't want to go into any political detail, and because I'm also on a daily basis surprised at what's happening across the Atlantic. Right, so what is diversity, equity, inclusion? Well, these are issues which have to do with gender, race, disability, age, appearance, etc. And the question is, why does DEI matter for corporations? Now, there are 2 dimensions. First of all, you have the ethical dimension. So it has to do with ethics, like many things about ESG are ultimately ethical questions. And there is also the minimum ethical standards have been solidified in corporate law. And I'm going to talk about US data. So corporate law, well, you have many of these laws who have to do with DEI. You have the Civil Rights Act in '64. You have laws on equal pay, equal employment opportunities, no discrimination of disabled people, etc., etc. So that's the reason why companies should stick to standards. And another reason why DEI may matter is that it may have an impact on corporate value. And it affects human capital quality, and therefore also corporate performance and hence corporate value. And also it may affect corporate reputation. And if stakeholders care about corporate reputation, it will also have an impact on corporate value. So this is the reason why we should think about DEI. Now, I'm going to show you a lot of numbers and even some regressions, but I've heard that many of the people in the audience have been trained in IESE Business School and are hence not very afraid of statistics and another regression or so. So I'm going to show you quite a lot of statistics as well. I'm going to let the numbers speak. Right, now the key challenge of research on DEI quality is that it's very difficult to identify DEI quality in a firm. So it's rather difficult, and that's why some people are just using proxies like how many women do we have on the board or in the management, how many people from racial minorities are on the boards, etc. Now the problem with these variables is they're very slowly moving and they're also endogenous. So we don't know the direction of causality. Is it because we have a lot of racial minorities on the board we have better performance, or is it better performing companies who hire this type of people? So what we are going to do, we're going to look at the causal effect between DEI and how stakeholders react. And how do we solve this? Well, we're going to look at litigation. So we're going to look at court cases in the US. It's a US sample. So we're looking at almost 5,600 DEI shocks to the company, and this litigation around gender, race, disability, and age on the company. So that's what we're going to do. And then the question is, do stakeholders care? In other words, who cares about diversity? Right. Now, first of all, we're going to look at the shareholders. Do shareholders care about diversity? So we're going to look at the stock price effect. So if there's litigation shock to the firm, the company is sued or indicted, sued under civil law or indicted under public law, do we see a stock price effect? And here is a table. So the equation shows on the left-hand side we have alpha, and alpha is a monthly abnormal return, an abnormal return. So, and it's a pharma French Carhart adjusted return. And let me just explain how you have to read the graph. Now, here on the bottom, you have point 0, and point 0 is the month where the litigation is becoming public. The litigation is filed. And to the left-hand side, you have 12 from -1 to -12. So you basically have 12 months before the litigation, and on the right-hand side of the 0, you have 12 months after the litigation. And these blue dots, these are the abnormal returns. The blue dots, these are the beta coefficient, the parameter estimates. And the blue line, that's a 95% confidence interval. Now, for the people who like statistics or who don't like statistics, if the blue line is crossing the red 0 line, the horizontal line, if it's crossing, it doesn't matter. There is no relation whatsoever. And what we conclude from this graph is, well, all these abnormal returns are not different from 0. They're actually equal to 0. So it seems that the stock price does not react to a DEI shock. Yeah, the shareholders don't care, we don't see anything. That's a bit annoying. So we're going to run our regression, and the dependent variable in the left top corner is the cumulative abnormal return in 3 days before and 3 days after the event, the litigation filing. And so that's what we're going to investigate. What is determining this announcement effect in terms of share prices? And so in column 1, we basically relate these abnormal returns to the lawsuit shock. Now, people who know statistics and what you have to look for is 3 little stars or some stars. And these little stars stand for the fact, is this statistically significant, yes or no? If you don't have little stars, the relation doesn't exist. If you have little stars, the relation does exist. Column 1, no little stars. What can we read from this? If there's a lawsuit shock about DEI, it has no impact, no immediate impact on the cumulative abnormal return. So the share prices don't move. If you go to column 6, there you see that we disentangle or we dissect these lawsuits into a disability lawsuit, a gender lawsuit, a racial lawsuit. And again, no statistical significance, it doesn't matter. Then we look at column 5, and there you also see no statistical significance, and there we look at lawsuits which were launched after the Me Too movement, which is 2017, and after the Black Lives Matters movement, that's 2020. So we're going to look at gender cases after Me Too, and we're going to look at these racial cases after the Black Lives Matters, and that doesn't matter. So we also don't see more share price sensitivity. Okay? So we also control for the fact whether the judge who is going to be dealing with this litigation case, does he have Democratic leaning or Republican leanings? And also that doesn't matter. The only thing which is statistically significant is in column 2, and there we see that the relative penalty, so if the penalty which you have to pay as a company because of a discrimination case, a violation of discrimination, then the share price goes down a little bit because you have a negative sign. All right, so the conclusion is here, the key findings here is, well, we don't find much of a significant stock price reaction to DI litigation, and in our cross-sectional test, that's the table which we just were looking at, we don't see much either, with one little exception. Now, my co-author Yasmin Gieder said at that point, because we're a bit despondent, we did not see any reaction, and in all my other litigation research on the securities law, we basically see big share price responses. So the share price goes down. If you're sued under securities law about fraud, etc., share price goes down between 20–25% even. But my co-author said, well, maybe no one knows about it. No one knows about it. Who knows about this litigation? So that's why we said, let's look at the salience of this. And that's why we looked at 2 databases, which is Ravenpack and RepRisk Daily ESG News, and they're going to see whether it's picked up in the news. So Ravenpack look at 40,000 media outlets, which are then online media, printed media, social media, and RepRisk looks at 100,000 public sources. And they're going to check whether it's known in the press that this company's reputation may be tarnished because of a DEI case. Then we're also going to look at this RepRisk index, and that RepRisk index measures the reputation of a company. So is the reputation of a company going down, also by looking at the media, or not? And we're also going to look at the bottom here at an ESG score, a corporate social responsibility score. Does it move? And here again, we have some tables. So this is the regression equation. So on the left-hand side, you have the news items. It's a Poisson regression. So you want to see whether we see more news items after a litigation case. And if you look at this graph, again, you've got here a 0, and the 0 is the day of the litigation. If you go to the left-hand side, that's the days before the litigation, and to the right-hand side, we have the days after litigation. And what do we see on day 0? We see a very big jump upwards. The blue dot is very high, and this is significant because the blue vertical line is not crossing the red line, so this is still significant. So we see that this effect is picked up by the media. So the media are basically reporting on the fact this company has a DEI problem, a diversity issue. And there is more news than coming in day 1, 2, 3, 4. We basically see that the press is picking that up. And on the right-hand side, you see exactly the same pattern. So on day 0, the first day on which the DEI problem is public, we basically see that news is picking that up. All right, so the conclusion is the news coverage shows that these problems about DEI, they're available, they're salient, they're visible enough, and they're accessible to all stakeholders. So the stakeholders should be aware of the problem. And then we're going to look at, is the firm's reputation tarnished? And we're going to look at this RRI index on the left-hand side, and that's an ESG index. So it shows that what's the reputation of the firm. And on day 0, you see again a big jump upward, and it remains tarnished, because the higher the index, the worse the reputation. So we basically see a jump upward, so a worsening of reputation. On your right-hand side, we have an ESG index, and that's a very general index, which is slow-moving, and there we don't see that it's picked up. So the ESG index on a monthly basis doesn't pick it up. On the left-hand side, we have a daily index. So on a daily basis, it's picked up. On a monthly basis, not. So the conclusion is, yes, the reputation of the firm is tarnished, according to these indices, but we only see that it's picked up by this first index and not by rather slowly moving aggregate ESG index. So we still have some work to do. We have to work a bit more on ESG indices, not look in general, but look more specifically at the G pillar, and then what is constituting this GSG pillar. That's work to do because it's very early paper. We're still in the process of changing it. Then we also looked at share turnover. So is there much trading going on around litigation? And so here the share turnover, so how many shares are sold? Is there an increase in the number of shares which are sold? And again, we look here at day 0, and before the litigation is made public, we don't see much share turnover. It's just as normal, so it's abnormal share turnover. But on day 0, when this information is becoming public, we see this big jump upwards, and in the subsequent day. It's a bit surprising because now there's more trading going on, but the share prices don't move. So it could very well be that here some shareholders are selling out, but they can do it without much price pressure. So it seems to be picked up by specific types of shareholders. So that leads us to the question, what about institutional investors? Do they change their equity ownership? And we're going to dissect those institutional investors in hedge funds, banks, pension funds, mutual funds, etc. And we see on aggregate, we basically see that all the institutional investors, that their ownership in the quarter around this litigation goes down by 1.1%. If we look at the detail, then we don't see much in terms of detail, but this is an example of the institutional investors. And what do the institutional investors do? Well, they basically decrease their aggregate ownership, this institutional investor, by 0.4%. So institutional investors basically killed by 0.4%. The others are not statistically significant, but it all adds up to about 1.1% decrease in ownership. This is in the quarter of the filing, and here you have quarter 1 after the filing, quarter 2, and quarter 3, and so on. And we basically see that in quarter 1 after the filing, we basically see the effect is undone. So we see a temporary effect in decrease in equity ownership, but after 3 months, it's gone, and institutional investors invest in these firms again. Right, okay, then, so this is the conclusion. So some institutional investors, they react. Maybe some SRI funds are selling out. So we basically see a little bit of pressure in the mutual funds, and the aggregate decrease in ownership is 1.1%, but the effect is temporary. Then we look at bondholders. Now, you probably think, well, why do we care about bondholders? And you're probably right, because if you don't see anything in terms of share prices, why would the bondholders react, right? So because bondholders, they could only react if this DEI litigation would basically have an impact on default risk. And obviously that It's very rarely the case, or almost impossible. It has an impact on default risk. So the bondholders don't react. So we don't see pressure in bond returns corrected for market risk. We look at abnormal bond returns, but no significant impact on bond prices, no significant impact on returns. And then we will come to the employees, because I said, well, who cares about diversity? We're now looking at stakeholders, and employees are clearly stakeholders. So what we do is we look at Indeed, and Indeed is a platform where employees are rating their own company. So we're going to look at whether these ratings, whether how employees are perceiving their own company, is this changing because of this DEI litigation? So we scrape the whole platform, and we have there ratings of current and former employees, also employees of different hierarchies, low in the hierarchy, high in the hierarchy, and that's what we investigate. And column 1, for example, is we look at 3 months before the litigation and 3 months afterwards, and we're going to compare the perception of employees of their own company. So we run this regression. Post here on the left-hand side basically means what do we see after litigation? In this 6-month or 7-month window, -3 to +3, after the litigation, do we see a movement, a change in perception? And as you by now know, we're looking for little stars of statistical significance. And what do we see? No little stars whatsoever if we take 3 months before, 3 months after, 6 months before, 6 months after, 12 months before and after, no change in perception. Column 1 to 3 is the total perception, and 4 to 6 is then by all potential and former all current and former employees. 4 to 6 is by former employees, and 6 to 9 is by senior employees. So no reaction whatsoever. And we look at the overall reaction, we look at how they perceive leadership skills and how they perceive the corporate culture. Nothing at all. So these shareholders don't seem to care or don't seem to be aware. At least they don't react, they don't perceive their own company differently. And now we're going to look at highly skilled employees. And these are the employees who are the innovators. They're involved with R&D. And we're going to look at the patterns, which are before and after this litigation case. And on these patents, you have the people responsible for the patent. You can have 3 people or 5 people or 15 people or a whole lab. And we're going to see whether or not these people are present in a whole time period. So in other words, we're going to see whether these employees, these highly skilled employees, do they leave the company after a litigation case? Do we see people leaving? And that's what we're investigating. So in column 1 to 3, we look at 3 months before the litigation, 6 months after the litigation, and then we're going to see whether there's a difference before against after. So the variable we're interested in is the first one, the first line, which is called post. So after the litigation, do we see within this time frame, do we see people leaving? Because the Y variable is the number of movers, as you see there on the left-hand top, the number of movers. And what do we see then in column 2? We see that after litigation case, 6.3% of the top people, female innovators, they are leaving. Right? Yeah. And then in column 3, we have people from racial minorities, blacks and Hispanics. We look at the US sample. There we don't see anything. But over a 12-month period, in columns 4 to 6, we see that top innovators are leaving. And here in the next slide, here we have columns 4 to 6. There we look at the gender case. We have a gender discrimination case. Now, we want to ask what's happening then in this gender discrimination case. Do we see more people leaving after the litigation is relative to the number of people before the litigation? And in column 4, in column 4, you basically see that 10.6% of the people are leaving after a gender case, and we also see that 24% of the people... I think we're gone now, no? Yeah. Okay, we're still there. Yeah, okay, in column 5, you basically see that 24% of the women, of the top innovators, they basically leave after a gender case. So it has effect on the highly educated, important employees because they basically contribute to the innovation of the company. If we look now at columns 10 to 12, there we look at other types of litigation, age-related, mainly age-related litigation, and there we see that female and black and Hispanic people, they respond to this type of litigation and they leave the company more frequently than before the litigation. All right, so the conclusion is here we have a significant increase in the part of highly skilled employees, so these people seem to really care about this, especially female research, and especially after a gender case. So it may also have long-term consequences, the fact that we lose important people in these companies, because at the bottom you basically see there's negative impact. We have 1.7% fewer patent applications by these firms. You could basically say, well, this is only about high tech, right? It's not the case, because even in transport and logistics, there are many patents which are filed even in those industries. So we basically look across the board, across all industries, even in industries where you wouldn't expect you to have a lot of patents which are filed for. Now, what about business partners? We still continue, who cares about this? Well, business partners, because a company is, of course, dealing with companies in the supply chain. So we have supply companies, we have customer companies, and so on. What about those? Do they react? Are ties severed? Are contracts cancelled because of a problem in a targeted company? And that's not the case. So we don't see any change in business relations, and so it's just business as usual. So it seems that other businesses are just supplying companies, are basically buying products of companies. It does not seem to matter in the supply chain. And then we're going to look at the customers. And so we're going to look at short-term effects of customers. Do customers respond? Do customers care? Do they are going to adjust their consumption pattern in relation to companies which have a DI problem? And in the first column, we look at what's the consumption, the monthly consumption in month 0, 1, and 2, relative to months -3 to -1. So is consumption changing in the litigation month and afterwards relative to what was happening in terms of consumption before the litigation? And what we're interested in is in difference regression. We're interested in the second line, post multiplied by litigation. So what's indicated there is, do we see a change in consumption if in companies which are litigated, we have a DI problem, and after the litigation? And what we see there, we have a negative sign, so that shows that there is less consumption. And we see 2 little stars, statistical significance. So this relation matters. Column 2 is exactly the same. We have just an outlier correction, but we see that in the 3 months around litigation, after litigation, we basically see a fall in consumption. How much is it? 21 cents. 21 cents. Now you may say, this is very small, right? Who cares? But the monthly budget of a typical household on a specific brand, is $21. So we basically talk about a 1% decrease in consumption. Some consumers will care about it, and others will not care about it at all. And overall, it leads to a 1% fall in consumption budget of this tarnished brand. You could say that's very little, but maybe it isn't, because brands want to grow, and if you're basically falling by 1%, a 1% sales volume decrease is not to be ignored, I think. I think companies would worry about this. Then we're going to look on the right-hand side of this table, we're going to look at month 3 to 11, month 3 to 11 after the litigation versus the consumption before the litigation. And what do we see there? Nothing at all. So it seems that some consumers are responding immediately, but after 3 months, the effect is gone. So it seems that these consumers have a short-term memory. So it has a short-term effect, but in the long run, maybe not. So the conclusion is short-term decline in consumption of these litigated firms' brands, and there is a reduction of about 1% of monthly volume. By the way, you may be surprised about the number N there. N stands for number of observations, and you basically, if you read the number there, which is about 0.5 billion observations, then you're absolutely right. It's not a typo. We use 0.5 billion observations because these are all the scanner data. So we know about 600,000 households in the US, what they buy on a daily basis. And it's all going to the retail. So we know how many Coke cans they buy, whether they buy sweets or certain foods or cereal, and even refrigerators and televisions. So everything which goes to the retail, we basically have scanner data about. So even on our Blade computer, it took something like 2 weeks to run a regression. Right, so who cares about it? We already talked about the long-term effects. The long-term effects seem to be pretty limited, so consumers seem to have a short-term memory. It has an effect, but after 3 months, it's worn out. And then we're going to be a bit more careful about this. We're going to look at consumer heterogeneity, which consumers care about it. So we can now basically look at specific households by income type, by age, by educational level, by race. We also look at the household composition. Are we talking about a single parent with or without with children, for example, or a single person, or married people with and without children? How old are the children? So we can all investigate that. We also, at the very bottom line, we look at the consumption patterns, which you also get out of the scanner data. We can identify green households. They basically spend a lot of money on organic food or bio brands, etc. So we can look at that. We also look at where these households are living. Do they live in an urban area, a rural area? Do they live far away from a metropolitan area? So where are they located? We're also looking at the religious values, and the proxy for religious values is, are they living in a county which is, for example, Catholic dominated, so 80% are Catholics? Or do they live in a county where we have a lot of Lutheran evangelical people? Or do they live in a county where you have a lot of diversity? I'm just almost finished. Yeah, do they live in a county with a lot of diversity? And then maybe they're more tolerant toward other convictions, and maybe they care more about DEI. We also look at the political leanings. Do they live in a county where everyone is voting Democrat, where everyone is voting Republican, or we have a kind of a mixed voting? So these are the things which we investigate. Now, we don't find much. We have a lot of non-significant results, but these things matter. So it seems that middle-aged and senior households, they basically cut consumption more. I would have expected Generation Z would be very sensitive to this, but maybe Generation Z is not really that available yet in this household. These are very young people, right? Early 20s. So older people care more about DEI and they cut consumption. Urban households as well, white households as well. Democratic leaning households, they also care about this more, and also Catholic households. We're still in process of looking at some more subsamples to investigate. Now, we're reaching almost the end. Another stakeholder is the government. Does the government care? Now, the government has an impact on companies, and how do they have an impact on companies? Well, through subsidies. So we're talking about reimbursement of investment, tax credit, loans with favorable terms. So is the government adjusting their subsidy policy towards these companies? And we don't find anything about this, not at the federal, state, or county level, so they don't seem to observe it, care about it, so we don't see anything about this. Now, another thing is, does the firm itself care about it? Because one reason why we don't see anything in share prices, share price movement, is that maybe the shareholders think, well, the company will address it quickly, so it will not be a lasting problem. So, we're going to look at the corporate governance results, corporate governance reactions within the company, and the question is, do they hire more women on the board, more people from minorities? Do they also have now more people responsible for DEI, like, say, a diversity manager or an inclusion manager, and so on within HR? So we'll basically look at those elements. I'm going to skip the graph, but just give you the key findings. We find a significant increase in female directors after DEI litigation. So DEI litigation triggers the hiring of more women. So 1 out of 5 firms, immediately after a DEI problem, is hiring a female director, is adding a female director. We also find an increase in racial minority directors, less pronounced, but that's also something which we observe. And we also find more people who are within HR, or even at the board level, who are responsible directly for diversity and inclusion. So we basically see also that the firm is reacting, and that may be also one reason why we see less of a share price response, because the shareholders may expect that the firm will take action. Right, so this is the summary of the conclusion. I'm going to end here. I'm going to leave the limitations of the paper and the caveats. I still have some more slides about that for the discussant.
Thank you. So before I just give me one minute, half a minute, for an announcement. So I'm sure you have in your head already as many questions as are coming to my head. So there will be no papers this time. The questions will be asked directly with a microphone. So the only thing that I would be asking you is, think about your questions, try to summarize them as much as you can, so that after the discussion from Pascual, Luke can answer as many of your questions as possible. Okay. Thank you, Pascual.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you very much, Luke, for a super exciting paper, and thank you, of course, Jordi and Mark, for inviting me to comment on this paper. As Luke recently summarized the main idea of the paper, response to the question, who cares about diversity, equity, and inclusion, basically, it doesn't seem like a lot of people care, right? So it's business as usual for bondholders, most of the shareholders, the average employee, the suppliers, the government at all levels. Only a subgroup of customers seem to care, but only for a short time, and only a group of R&D related employees seems to care the most. So a couple of highlights of the papers that I found particularly interesting. Clearly is super timely and relevant, not only for the social movement that are mentioned in the paper, the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter, but fundamentally for what's been happening in the US the last couple of months. Not only what is the government doing, but how this is cascading down into the corporate world. Clearly, your paper could have potentially important implications. I really enjoy the multi-stakeholders. So you actually identify all the stakeholders and carefully try to not only find solid data, but also make sure that your methods really adjust to see how they would respond. And I have to say that the data set is amazing, right? So it's super granular, particularly at the customer, but not only at the customer, it's super granular. There's a lot of information there, and I see at least 3 more papers that you can leverage from that data set. And one personal thing that I enjoy is that for every element that I was thinking, I'm sure the authors did not think about it, you did think about it carefully, you thought about it, and you actually anticipated. And just as an example, I was kind of questioning, well, are really stakeholders aware of this type of information when it comes to DI litigations? And you kind of started off the paper by ensuring that this is the case, right? So, and clearly it's a very thought-provoking, right? Because I think the paper really started with a genuine inquiry in the tone of the question, who cares about DEI? But then at the end, you do have this provocative realization or ironic realization, well, who cares about DEI, right? And apparently just a few. So some ideas or some elements to think about it. And I know this is work in progress, and I think this mostly goes to the academic audience in the room. But I do believe that there's a lot of space to fine-tune a little bit the framing, the theoretical framing of the paper, but also the theoretical insights that you derive from the paper. And I see here two main elements. Because to the question about who cares about anything in corporation, we do have theories that tell us who care, right? And in particular, stakeholder saliency theory does tell us about who should care about different topics, and is the stakeholders that are powerful, that have legitimacy, and that have the sense of urgency. This is the idea of stakeholder saliency. My interpretation of stakeholder saliency is that it's fundamentally issue-based. Right? So it's not that we have a stakeholder that is universally legitimate or that is universally powered. It's based on the issue. And actually, I think your results show exactly that, because who should care about DI litigation? And you do find that female innovators are the ones who are actually responding to this. And you can frame it as those that have legitimacy, power, and urgency. They do have legitimacy because there's a high personal stake in the topic. Clearly, they have immediate personal relevance, the sense of urgency, because if they're not directly affected, maybe a colleague of them are affected, and therefore they might be next in line. But they also have the power because they are professionals that have outside opportunities and therefore can actually leave the company for alternative options. The other thing that I found very interesting, where you can explore a little bit more, you kind of present this almost dichotomy in terms of what are the main reasons why companies adopt DEI policies is either because of normative pressure or because of instrumental reasons. And implicitly, because of your result of not finding that the financial market react to this, you kind of miss the idea that this is an instrumental element. However, the fact that the female innovators are leaving the company, I think is kind of a reinforcement of the idea that it does have instrumental value. You did mention it in your presentation, but in the paper it feels like more like, well, it seems like if nobody cares, it's mostly companies are doing it for normative reasons exclusively, right? Clearly, for me, the main issue about the paper is the extent to which lawsuits are the best measure of poor DEI policies. And one question that I had is, well, are you sure what you're measuring is reaction to diversity failing or just reactions to lawsuits or lack of reactions from lawsuits in general, right? So you do cite a few papers, but I would like to see in your data set whether this is true, right? So, okay, so they don't care about DEI lawsuits. What are the type of lawsuits that do have an impact to see that there's some reactions to lawsuits in general? The other thing is, well, to what extent, lawsuits feeling are really the shock rather than the lawsuit sentence, right? So I think the idea of innocent until proven guilty may actually play a role here. The fact that you just have a lawsuit does not mean that you have done anything bad necessarily, and this is how it might be interpreted by the different stakeholders, right? And then you kind of started off by saying that litigations are a shock, and part of the previous research actually have the issue of endogeneity. Litigations, in a way, or at least partially, they are endogenous, right? Because this is part of the practices that companies do. So what you might actually be seeing as lack of results may actually be reflecting pre-existing knowledge of pre-existing conditions, right? So I think I have 2 more minutes or less than 2 minutes. Two things that I, given that this is a corporate governance conference, I think there's a lot of opportunity here to explore a little bit more the results that they do change the corporate governance structure, how they change the board. And I think the space here to really explore is whether these changes are window dressing, they're simply symbolic, or they are a credible commitment. They are substantive, and this is exactly the mechanisms that the company has in order to minimize the negative reaction of some of stakeholders. And I personally found perhaps the most surprising finding was the fact that when you look at what are the households that react, on the one hand, you have the Democrats' households, and on the other hand, you have Catholic households who can be more associated with more conservative approaches. And here I was really trying to think about future work for research. I kind of, the way I interpreted this is an element that in principle, you should have polar positions, but this is where they overlap and they react in the same way. And I was wondering, in moving forward, whether there are more topics, there are more elements that can be common to the extreme of this political spectrum. Okay, I think I'm out of time. I see Núria looking at me really badly. So, look, fantastic job. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to read your work. Thank you.
Thank you. So, look, if this is okay with you, I know that you might feel that you want to answer to Pascual, which is absolutely understandable, but I think we should maybe try to put together 2 questions, and together with what Pascual has said, and then you can answer to the 3 things all at once because we don't have that much time. So yes, we'll have the first one here.
Thank you so much. Very insightful. I am thinking about the potential implications and extrapolation of the finding on the current situation on Target. Target already is confronting a proactive boycott from the black population after they terminate the Buying Black program. Preliminary figures show that 11% of traffic decrease in the first month and 9% of the online traffic decrease. What can we expect over time of this proactive boycott compared with the analysis of more organic situation as the ones you already researched?
Thank you. And then we'll take another question here at the front. Just 1 second, you need the mic.
I have a sense that people care less about DEI, especially intended as DEI programs within the firms, when in countries where you have good equality law and good employment protection law, because people might think that anyway, good equality law takes care of DEI. For instance, the UK has the Equality Act 2010, which is very strong, provides very good protection of minorities. And so people might react much less when they think that there's already in place regulations to protect minorities, and they don't think that the firms should do more and go beyond that. So you might find that, there might be less reaction when there is stronger equality laws.
Thank you. I said 2 questions, but there's a third one, and that's the last one. So very short, right? So we'll take a third one, and Luke will do what he can to answer all of them.
So in terms of who cares, I'd be interested to know if you'd looked at shareholder resolutions in the run-up to the incident, the shock, and in the following years. It is possible that NGOs or other asset owners cared, and they express their caring through shareholder resolutions or negative voting, not just share price shocks, because obviously asset owners may be locked in for 20, 30, 40 years, and share prices in the 9 months don't matter as much.
Thank you.
Right, let me just try to quickly answer these questions in terms of extrapolation of these things. Now, we have 22 years of data. So we start in the year 2000. So we basically look at different environment, different political environments as well. So we have the Bush Jr. years, we have the Clinton years, no, not the Clinton years, Bush Jr. years. We have the Obama years, we have Trump 1 included, not of course the last couple of months. So, so we basically look at whether these litigation issues are basically responded to in a whole different time frame. So I think now that given what we have seen now in the last couple of months in the Atlantic, the sensitivity towards these kind of things is much higher. It would be very difficult to see how people would respond, because the political issue here is very worrying, I think, because first of all, companies have to stick to the ethical standards in the law. So that's what so these are litigations of companies which are violating all these civil rights legislation. And you could basically find then they should be sued, rightfully so. But now we have also seen that judges are put under pressure, that law firms who are defending DEI are put under pressure. So that's why we're now in a completely different legal system, even where you even don't know whether laws will be upheld by judiciary. So that's why it's very difficult to basically to extrapolate about what's going to happen. By the way, I do strongly believe that DEI is important. And why is it important? Well, there is a literature, overall, a very positive literature about inclusiveness and diversity. And this academic literature is very positive because it's shown that teams which are diverse, they're more innovative. So it's creating corporate value. It's better decision-making. You have different perspectives. If you have diverse people on the board, they can take care about different types of customers. I also have done a paper about Sri Lanka, about diversity in Sri Lanka. You may wonder, well, why Sri Lanka? Well, Sri Lanka is an interesting laboratory because 50% 15 years ago, a civil war ended, which was 25 years, and that was a civil war between different ethnic communities, different religions, different languages. And we're going to look then at the composition of the board, the social diversity on the board, and we're going to see then, is it high or low social diversity, and how do these companies thrive? There's still a bit of a problem of endogeneity, but we find that diverse boards are basically connected, correlated, or maybe even causing better diversity, better performance, corporate performance. So there's a lot of elements which are saying that DEI matters. So in terms of loyalty of employers, customer loyalty, etc., trust in the company, coming back to Colin Mayer's point. So we see that it matters. It's difficult to always look at the counterfactual, right? You have a diverse team and you have an outcome. And then you're matching that with a non-diverse team and you have an outcome. But it's still very difficult to match because the circumstances are always a bit difficult. So it's difficult to prove, but the literature says that diversity matters. Now, there's also skeptical literature which says, well, many companies are just using DEI as for diversity washing, yeah? You know, greenwashing, social washing, diversity washing. Companies are doing as if they're very DEI-oriented, but in practice, they don't do much better than other companies. So there is some warning about this. Also tokenism, right? We put a woman on the board and everything is solved. Some people say just a token, you need to have 2 or 3 women and then you will have an impact. Not just one, you also need numbers there. It's also difficult sometimes to make diverse teams work together, which you may have a productivity loss. Not for the highly educated people, but something at the bottom of the hierarchy where blue-collar workers have to work together, and sometimes there are racist people there. So it's pretty difficult then to have these teams work together. So there's also a literature there. At that level, sometimes you have productivity loss, and there are costs to try to make teams work together, diverse teams work together. So I think that's my answer to your question. I must say I forgot the second question.
I need you to be very fast, or maybe we can continue this later, if that's okay. Can we continue the discussion for the next panel?
Can I just add with one thing? Now, for this paper, what you have to be careful about is that we look at litigation shocks, but maybe the sample which we have is only the tip of the iceberg, because in many cases, the company will basically settle with the employees, and that we don't know, because they sign a confidentiality agreement. So maybe companies with the very serious violations, they basically can't win this in a court of law, so are going to settle. And basically, I have in my database also very serious cases. Goldman Sachs is settling with female employees, a class action suit, 2,600 people for $231 million. Right? You have very, very large cases. And maybe on the other hand, there are also very small cases where you basically are going to pay $20,000 to a person who has been treated very badly. Why would you risk going to court, right? So you immediately settle with little money. So we're missing quite a lot of cases in the database. Maybe the very severe case we're missing, and also very small case we're missing because the company is not worthwhile going to court, right? So it's maybe only the tip of the iceberg which we're basically observing in my database, because the problem may be much worse than what my data show.
Thank you both for this paper and for the discussion of the paper. Thank you.